Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour in first episode of season 6 and the first one in 2026. So happy New Year to all our followers. We do appreciate all of the people who joined on, especially in 2025. We gained a lot of followers on YouTube and also on Spotify and Apple and all those places. So we do appreciate you tuning into this. Um, so to start the year off right, I have a special guest, Bill Hulseman, who is the author of a book called Six to Carry the Casket and One to Say the Mass. He's an Irish Catholic, and he has a lot of experience that he jotted down into this book. And full disclosure, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm dying to read it. So welcome to the Gritty Hour, Bill.
Thanks for the invitation, Tom. Let's get
Oh,
gritty.
let's get gritty.
I
Yes.
love it gritty.
So tell me all about what is the outline of this book? What's it about?
Six to Carry the Casket and One to Say the Mass is a collection of personal essays that I wrote over the course of several years, really starting at the end of 2020. Um, the first part of the book I call Origins, and it reflects on, it's in those essays I reflect on early experiences, formative relationships, a lot about my family, a lot about growing up queer in an Irish Catholic, very straight world. Um, the second part is I call tradition, and it's sort of like if the first part was about the identities that were given to me, the second part is what did I do with those identities and how did they shape the way that I see the world and figure out who I want to become.
Right.
The third part of the book is a little different. I call it Pride, and each essay is about some figure, some celebrity, some book or TV show or movie that was really important to me, particularly to help me understand myself as a gay man, as a queer person.
Mhm.
You know, visibility is very important, and representation is, and when I didn't see myself seen anywhere else in the world, I was looking for clues of, what can I look forward to in life. So these are all things that helped me understand myself and the world and everything from Madonna to the Golden Girls and some of the clubs that I went to first where I really found queer spaces and but also figures like Noel Coward and like Ethel Merman and Judy Garland and Barbra Streisand, the Belters who were so important, not just as entertainers but also as advocates for their queer friends and family members. So the third part is about pride and about how do we construct our identities and how do I want to shape my gay identity.
Right.
So altogether, it's a book that is really about identity and how did I make the decisions to of what to hold on to and what to let go of.
Right.
Um,
Now, how did growing up Catholic shape your gay identity, and have you spoken to other gay people who didn't grow up Catholic so you can get an analysis of how you got that slant? You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. No, I think I look at it as reciprocal. I think growing up Catholic really informed how I'm gay, but also growing up gay also informed how I'm Catholic.
Hmm.
I always had a sense of being on the outside, and that gave me real compassion for people who also, experience any sort of marginalization or feeling ostracized.
Right.
And when that helps me focus like where in my Catholic life does that show up? And Catholic social teaching is incredibly important to me because it attends to the what's the preferential option for the poor, so always make a choice that's going to benefit the poor, not the rich, things like that. My identity as a gay person helped me see that that was really important in terms of Catholic faith. On the other hand, how I was Catholic also shaped how I was gay. I wasn't just about understanding myself, in either or terms. It's always looking for integration, always looking for understanding who I am as a creature of God and what does that mean and what does that call me to do. I look at, uh, I, I'm really sick of apologizing, or when people try to find some justification to balance, um, oh, well, there's this teaching of the church that says this is how you're supposed to be a human. my lived experience says something very different.
Right.
And that there was a piece of Catholic teaching that was really important for me that my parents really emphasized, and it's the primacy of conscience. That our conscience is that part of us that's closest to God, and if we're ever not sure what to do, it's always listen to your conscience. My parents were really clear about. My mom used to say, even if the Pope says it's wrong, what does he know? He's just another priest. It's
Wow.
your conscience is the last judge.
Mm,
So that gave me a clue of like, okay, I'm not wrong here. Like my body, my identity is telling me I'm right. And I really believe at some point the rest of the church is going to catch up and recognize it too, and
right.
start to see instead of seeing an aberration, why don't we look at difference as an opening to what else has God created that we don't understand?
Right.
I think the Catholic in me looks at my gay identity not just as its own thing, but as part of creation, as part of, it's part of something bigger.
Sure. Are you still a practicing Catholic, or do you identify as a?
I identify as Catholic, but I haven't gone to church in a long time.
Okay.
I
Uh,
uh, I talk about this in the book quite a bit. I taught and I studied religion in college and in graduate school, and I taught religious studies, and I was a campus minister. I was basically a professional Catholic for a long time, and I was a school administrator, and I really saw a career in Catholic education, and then I had a real hard pivot because my conscience was screaming at me. I
mm,
went to my whole career. I thought, okay, this is my opportunity to move the needle in the church. At least offer my students a different face of the church. It's not Rome, it's us. It's
right.
we are the church, and our diversity is the diversity of the church.
Right. Right.
And that was important to me. Um, until I went to a conference and I heard Dan Savage speak. And if you know Dan Savage, he's a
I do. Yeah.
columnist and a writer, and he focuses on sex and relationships. And he was talking about the It Gets Better project that he and his husband Terry started. They had a goal to collect videos from maybe they thought they'd get 100 celebrities who were queer and could send a message to kids saying it gets better. Here's my
Right.
experience. It's hard now for you. It's going to get better. And this was in response to, a spate of suicides that made the headlines, by queer teenagers because of bullying and because of identity. And um, I went to hear Dan speak with a bunch of my colleagues, and the room was packed. And after he talked about the project and opened it up for questions, somebody got up and asked on behalf of somebody else, because they explained that person couldn't even get up and ask a question without risking her job at a conservative religious school.
Uh,
And so she asked the question on her behalf, saying, I work at a conservative religious school. I want my students to know that I'm present to them. How can I further support them? And Dan took a minute and he cocked his head and he said, "You're not going to like my answer."
mm,
And he said, my advice is to get your resume in order. And the room was kind of shocked by that. We were expecting like, oh, he's going to give us some insight. What can we say to kids? What programs can we do? Whatever.
at the time, not to interrupt, but at the time, did
Mhm.
you have an inclination you wanted to leave the profession in the religious school?
No, I thought
Okay.
I had a life career in Catholic schools. I thought my
Understood.
whole career was going to be, teaching and leading in Catholic schools. So in that moment, he answered, he said, "Well, get your resume in order." And he paused. And he said, you might think that your presence there is sending them a message that they're safe, but your presence there is sending them the message that it's okay to leave part of yourself at the door on the way into work. And that hit me. That was like an arrow to my heart. I mean, it just destroyed me. It just, in that instant, my self-understanding as a teacher, as an educator, my self-understanding as a Catholic
Right.
flipped upside down. And I suddenly was in a crisis of conscience. That sparked a lot of discernment and reflection to figure out, okay, it's time to look elsewhere. And I started my journey to finding a position in a non-Catholic school. And when I moved to Tacoma, Washington to be a middle school principal. And the first thing I could do when I moved into my office, I was able to put up a safe space poster. And it struck me that that's such a simple thing. Just, you're decorating your office, you're sending a poster, you're putting a poster up that you see in millions of classrooms of just
Right.
saying this is a safe space. I
Right.
couldn't do that in a Catholic school. And I thought, why, why did I not see this for so long? I
Right.
had a whole job as a teacher and a campus minister of making safe spaces for students, and yet I didn't have one myself,
Right.
so it was a really hard, journey. But after that, I was still engaged. I was still going to mass. I was still part of a religious community, and but after my mom died, and my mom died after a long illness, and then a year later, my sister very suddenly, and my dad a couple of months after her.
Wow, that's a lot.
And with all of that,
Yeah.
I really burned out. Both between work was hard and all of this grief was I was just drowning in grief. That's when going to church just got to be too hard. What once it used to be a place of, solace and community and calm, and yet I'd walk in and it was all these feelings, all these emotions were, I couldn't sit, I couldn't settle. I was still very angry at the church, at myself, at other Catholics for years of not recognizing kind of seeing the big picture. And
Mm.
yeah, so I haven't gone back. I like to think of it as the church and I are in a fight. They
Mm.
don't know it yet, and they're not responding, but yeah, we're in a fight.
Mm.
But I can't. I've never wanted to convert. I've never. I've tried. I tried to convert a few times when I was much younger, and it wasn't. I felt, for me, religion was so deeply inscribed in us, and
Right.
it's. I don't want to go to somebody else's tradition. I want my tradition to
Right. When you say convert,
welcome me.
what were you looking at? Just when you said I thought about converting.
When I was in college, I did a lot of studies in Judaism, Jewish
Okay.
history, and Jewish theology and philosophy, and I thought very seriously a couple of times about converting. And I learned a lot, and I actually taught Intro to Judaism for a long time, rooted in my own academic and personal interest in the tradition. But no, for me, it was just, no, this is really written into me. It's not about jumping ship and finding
Mm.
another boat. It's about figuring out, okay, well, where's this boat going, and what can I do to help steer it? You know.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question. When you were teaching in the Catholic school,
Mm.
did you try and push a boundary and was pushed back, or did you just you had a sense that this wouldn't be right in this space?
Now, it's funny. I was totally out in these schools. I worked in very different. They were very progressive and very inclusive schools.
Right.
In general, women's orders have been more inclusive and justice focused, and particularly for LGBTQ folks in the church, the women's orders have been on the forefront of advocacy and inclusion. And I was really lucky to um, work for the same order in two different schools. And they had a mission that was very inclusive, and I felt very comfortable in it. So I was out to my colleagues. I wasn't officially out to my students, but my students all knew.
Right. Right.
But the so it my head of school who was a nun at the time, and the head of school at the time is a nun.
Hmm.
Um, and she loved my ex. She invited us to parties. She didn't see me. I didn't have to leave that part of myself at the door all the time. But I couldn't totally, own it. There were certain parents that, you just knew you couldn't say certain things in front of certain
That's what
parents
I was going to
because,
ask you about some of the
yeah.
parents. Yeah.
And I worked but the second school I worked in was in the DC area, and it's much more conservative Catholic culture.
Hmm.
Still the same kind of mission, still the same commitment to inclusion, but the parent culture was a little more litigious,
Right.
like the rest of DC is.
Yeah.
It was treacherous. Once there was, I call it the Great Lesbian Debacle. Once there was a speaker who was coming to talk about um, just her experience of growing up Catholic and coming out later, and it wasn't anything more than that. And it was all part of the diversity programming of the school. And one particular family took offense at that, and it became a huge crisis for the school, and it became very divisive. And this family used their political influence and connections to kind of threaten the school community, and they were ready to. They were. I don't know why, but this was their thing that they were so angry about. And all it was one speaker out of, how many speakers come to a school over the course of a year, but one speaker who came along to just tell her story, and they just didn't want to even open the doors to that.
Wow.
That's hard to see. Another time, a student group asked me to moderate kind of a series that they were doing. Students start clubs or they start an organization and they want a faculty presence to be able to, be in a room and have a meeting and stuff. So I was glad to be there. The announcement, though, to the student body made it sound like Mr. Hulseman is going to teach you how to come out to your parents.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I was in the back of the auditorium like, that's not what it is. But it was just it was going to be like a lunch, bring your lunch to have a conversation about what are the issues that come up with coming out. And that's all it was. But it sounded like Mr. Holzman's going to teach you how to come out. And that became another crisis that a couple of families heard and kind of got all blown up about. And now in Catholic schools, if you're in violation of the teaching of the Catholic Church, you shouldn't be hired by the school. The the thing is, and this is where I think the primacy of conscience really comes in. It's at the discernment of the leaders of that school. So if they decide that I'm welcome there, great. However, the way that the Catholic Church is structured, if somebody wants to cause a problem, they can really cause a problem. If a school is governed by the local diocese, then you just go to the local bishop and you complain, and they do an investigation, and usually that ends up in queer people getting fired from Catholic schools.
Mm-hmm.
The the worst part, I went to school with this burden on my shoulders every day. If a parent complained about me, they would complain to the diocese. The diocese would complain to Rome. Rome then complains to the order, and then the order is expected to crack down on the school. And this is all, this has happened many, many times. Um, and that process became really clear and treacherous once equal marriage started passing. State by state, states were passing equal marriage. I lived in Massachusetts when it was first passed, and it was really joyous and it was really wonderful. And then about a month after people started getting married, people started getting fired because now your sexual orientation and your marriage was a matter of public record. And so people were going in on witch hunts and scanning the listings for marriages and then calling and complaining. So every time there would be equal marriage in a state, there would be a year of firings from religious institutions because people were exercising their rights, but one of those rights was not the protection of your identity because of your sexual orientation.
Right. I think
So I went
this
to
this
school with that burden every day on my shoulders, and I thought that was okay. In retrospect, I look back at that like, why did I let myself carry that?
mm,
That's not my burden to carry. Yeah.
yeah. Does that issue translate into the book? I do want to circle back to the book, but I do have to ask you
Yeah.
one question though, because I
Hmm.
know you're not a non-practicing Catholic. We said before we started recording, you and I have a couple of things in common. One, we're both the youngest of large Irish Catholic
Hmm.
families, and you are Irish, right?
Oh yeah.
And
So the name is German, but yeah, we are culturally very, very Irish. My
and
mother was Sheila Murphy. I mean,
okay, that's pretty damn Irish, Bill.
Yeah.
Um, I just have to ask you what you think of the new pope, in essence.
I don't think anybody could have been more stunned than I was watching the announcement. It Habemus Papam, and then all of a sudden it's not only an American but a Chicagoan.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe, even though he's a Sox fan, I think it's still pretty exciting
And
that
I don't know if you ever seen that video with him at a White Sox game long before he was pope.
yeah.
It was a little
Yeah.
surreal. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm very excited about what's happening in the church right now.
Mhm.
It's going to take a while for it to trickle down from the legacy of Francis and the now building legacy of Leo. But really, the minute that he was selected, I thought that was very interesting. It told us something about, the conclave had previously selected, John Paul II and then Wojtyla and then Ratzinger, and that was a very conservative turn theologically and doctrinally for the church. And Benedict, former Ratzinger, really took us, I think, regressed. And when it comes to women, when it comes to queer people in the church, we really, it was threatening.
Yeah.
Um, then with Francis, Francis shifted the tone, and it wasn't about changing, rewriting the theology. It was about shifting the tone, and I think he was consistent across the board about being less litigious and doctrinally focused and more about pastoral care. And, this is a time when the world is in suffering. And so the church is supposed to be providing nourishment, not, what did he said, the Eucharist is nourishment, not a reward.
Yeah.
I thought that was really profound. And he didn't get everything right, but he turned everybody's heads at least, and he brought a different tone. I think selecting another non-European, particularly an American whose ministry for the last 3 decades has largely been in Latin America.
Right.
I think that sends a message about the focus of the conclave, the focus of the church is on the global church. And that includes, not just reaching out to those parts of the world that have been denigrated over the centuries, but also people in places like the U.S. and Europe, where people are women and queer people and people of color are still at a disadvantage. So I think I think it's very hopeful.
Yeah.
I was very excited when he chose the name Leo, because the last Leo that we had was crucial in the Catholic social teaching. His encyclicals really responded to the suffering of the modern world and gave us the language for what to focus on in the 20th century and beyond about, how do we care for the world? How do we care for creation? That this is all part of the church's mission now.
Yeah.
I think we're back to that. The social teaching of the church is what I think that name selection was intended to communicate.
Yeah. That's one of the rare opportunities of a conclave. You get to a little peek into the window of the mindset of the majority of the College of Cardinals that you don't get in the day to day. Only when they're
Hmm.
choosing a new pope do you, and you see the direction they're
Hmm.
thinking when they choose the new pope, and that's I
Yeah.
always find that intriguing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this book isn't all about being a gay teacher in a Catholic school. There's a lot.
No.
There's a lot of things, and
There's more.
if it's okay with you, I'd like to share the page for your book as we keep discussing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think I have it up here somewhere. Hold on. First of all, the name is cool. The name of the book.
Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Six to carry the casket and one to say the mass.
Yes. Which
Yeah.
always makes an Irish Catholic like myself turn his head.
Yeah.
All right, so let me figure out what the hell I'm doing. You take a month off, you don't know what the hell you're doing here. I don't know if you can see
Feel
that
like
on your end.
there it is.
Actually, I think
Oh,
this
that's my
is
website.
I
Yeah.
think that's your website. Yeah. So this is and I like how you have alternatives to Amazon as the places you can buy the book. But discuss some of the first few sections you were mentioning in the beginning of this podcast.
Hmm.
Well, first of all, before you even get into that, how do you write? Do you
Mm.
because it is a group of essays, or they are a
Hmm.
group of essays, and I'm wondering, do you walk around with a notebook and a pen
Mm.
when
No,
inspiration hits?
each of these essays, I'm not a fiction writer. I didn't have the gift for fiction, and
Right.
I'm not trying to write, I wasn't trying to write a big book of philosophy, but as my academic training, as a teacher, essay writing, short form, deep reflection on a topic, that's my comfortable language. I live in the essay world. I love that
Right.
opportunity to take an idea, dive deep, and figure out, how do I, what am I learning from this? What am I getting from this? What am I seeing from this? So that was the natural form when I was for me, and when I was grieving and I had burned out and I took some time off. I started writing really as a way to heal, to recover from burnout, and to try to figure out not only how I landed here, but also where I wanted to go. And then the rest of the world shut down. I started writing in 2020. I burned out in 2019, took time off, and then the whole world shut down. And I started asking, well, how did I get here? But how did we all get here?
Right.
So for me, the writing process is, with those kind of big questions out there, when something struck me, when I couldn't, put an idea down, then I would typically scribble a couple of notes, or add a couple of notes in my phone, and then make my way to a coffee shop and open my laptop and start thinking and start writing. So
Mm.
my natural habitat for writing, and really for living in general, is a coffee shop. So
Okay. Well, that's yeah.
there's something about the noise of a coffee shop, the clutter, it makes me focus, but then it also, anytime I need a break, I just need to look up and look around, and life is happening. Things are
Yeah.
happening in a coffee shop, and
From my perspective as a guy who has a podcast, is I interview a lot of people, and an unbelievable amount of art projects or projects in general that was started during COVID.
mm,
It's really unbelievable. A lot of musical projects, a lot of because I do interview a
yeah,
lot of people who've written books, and a lot of
yeah.
them started those books during the shutdown.
It's the mix of what to do with all that grief and with all that pain and with all the, all of the emotions that were coming up.
Right.
And also, we had a lot of time to sit still. Those of us who were not on the front lines had a lot of time to sit still. And so I'm not surprised that it has, I mean, it's not just creative output, but also, small businesses, people like me
Yeah.
taking a total shift of their careers as well.
Yeah.
We're going to look back maybe in 20 years and start to understand what was the rupture. And for each of us individually, we all had to make the choice, like, well, do I try to go back to my old life, or do I try to create something new?
Yeah. Well,
And so yeah, of course, all of this is going to come out of that time.
this book, I think, has a, should I say, mostly humorous. You're self-analytical, that's obvious, and you're, introspective, and you pour it into words, which is great.
Mm.
Um, your parents fall a lot into this book.
Yeah,
Your observations growing up, and this and that,
yeah.
and the little wits that they had, which were great.
Yeah, my parents are very much present in the book. My mom in particular. I write about my mom a lot.
Hmm.
And I write about my mom, my relationship with my mom specifically. It's not trying to be biographical about her, but more about our relationship. What did I get from it, and what are the memories that I'm keeping alive, and
Right,
what are the
right.
things that I needed to make peace with, and I needed to, so what do I wanted to hold on to, and what do I want to let go of with the relationship with my mom.
Hmm.
The title of the book actually comes from an essay about my mom. And the title of that essay has the same title, Six to Carry the Casket and One to Say the Mass. And it's a phrase that my mom used a lot. Big Irish Catholic family. So, people are always in awe of, you had how many children? And so people would say, would find out she had 10 children and say, you had 10 children? And she'd lean in and say, well, they're from my husband's first marriage.
Well, I'm a
And
lot
by the time
older.
they figure out, wait, aren't you your husband's first marriage? She's already moved on to a next topic, right? But then seven sons, you had seven sons, and her quip was, well, God gave me seven sons for a reason.
you know.
Six to carry the casket and one to say the mass.
That was her line. Okay.
That was her
It's a
line.
great line. It's a great
Yeah,
title for the book too.
yeah.
Yeah, well, that
And it was my
explains.
first identity because, when
Yeah.
I was born, so I was the seventh son, and by the time I was conscious, it was clear the first six brothers were not going to seminary. So.
Mm. I'm
I took
interested.
that as like, oh, I guess I'm the one who's supposed to say the mass. And
Well,
it
yeah.
didn't lead me on a road to ordination,
No, but
but
at the beginning of this podcast sounded like you might have been heading down that road. Who knows?
yeah, as a kid, I think it was an option that was on the table, but
Yeah.
it was not a calling that I ever
Yeah.
received. No.
Gotcha. Um, have you thought about your relationship with your mother and father as a child versus your relationship with your mother and father as an adult?
I
And
explore both.
yeah.
Throughout the book, um, I think I was going back to really formative experiences. The chapter about my mom isn't, like I said, it's not autobiographical. Instead, I kind of picked up the phrases that she was famous for. There were things that she used to say all the time. Semantics is the problem with the world today. That was another famous one of hers.
I actually read that
Um,
this afternoon. Yeah.
uh, so each sort of portion of that essay is just giving context, or these were the things that I really hold on to, is her phrases, her language. And she had a great wit, and she was very dry, but her economy of language, I always really appreciated. Um,
Well, she
but
was a
it was
Murphy.
more about, how did those phrases land in my life? How did they shape me? And some of them were really painful to return to, and some of them were really lovely and fun. And
Yeah.
when she came to my graduation from divinity school, she was taking notes on, the information, degrees that people were doing and doctoral theses that they were writing. And so after the ceremony, she said, "Well, congratulations, that was lovely. Now, what the hell is ecofeminist spirituality?"
I read that this afternoon too.
Yeah.
I got a chuckle out of that one too.
So I wanted to explore, how do those phrases embed, and what does that do? Like, why am I holding on to those things? And, what are the things that I need to make peace with? I talk a lot about my parents drinking throughout the book, and especially in that essay.
Hmm.
Um, and it was painful to go back to that, but it was also really helpful to let me see how I had healed from it. And toward the end of their life, for basically for health reasons, they stopped drinking. And so before they died, I was able to make peace with them and kind of heal a little bit of that.
They were heavy
Of
drinkers
our,
when you were growing up.
yeah, yeah. So I think starting in the time when I was in middle school, they started drinking pretty heavily, and they were of the cocktail generation. They were of, I call them the Mad Men generation.
Yeah.
They were just drinks at all times of the day. It was just part of social fabric for their community, but when I think they were each dealing with their own grief and their own, they were in their 50s and 60s when I was, in middle school and high school. So they were going through their own living. I don't know why they started drinking so heavily, but they did, and it was deeply impactful on the whole family.
So when you were
But I was the last one
younger,
at home, so I was the only one who grew up, in the house when alcohol was also living there. So
but
it was.
before that, when you were younger, they weren't drinking.
I think it was social drinking
Okay,
until I was about middle school time.
understood.
And but I also, both of my parents had parents who were alcoholics, and as anybody who's got addiction in their family knows, it's a trait that visits a family every generation somewhere.
Right.
So it's not a surprise that it popped up for them, but
No.
it had an impact, had a really big impact.
Well, obviously they were, as you say, from the social drinking generation, but they were also
Mm.
from the 6 to 10 kids per family generation. And I'm curious. I know you lost your sister, and my condolences. But what do your other siblings think about this book?
That's a good question.
You're on the bestseller list just by having them buy it.
If I could get everybody in the family to buy a copy, that alone would bump my Amazon
You
numbers
throw
up.
your
But
cousins in there, and you're.
my sister Patty is also, she's number 9. I'm number 10.
Mhm.
And we're very tight. We're very close. And she was the first person that I wanted to read the book when it was finished. I wanted her to read it, both because it was important to me and she was very excited to read it. But I also wanted her perspective. I wanted to know if I was fair, if I was um, accurate. I didn't want to, rustle any feathers or cause any scandal, but I also wanted to be truthful and I wanted to be honest and tell my story. So I was eager to hear her opinion, and she was able to. She read it, and she let me know she thought I was very fair about my parents. It was very focused on my relationship with them. I was not trying to impose my experience on the other siblings. I didn't drag anybody's name through the mud,
Yeah.
nothing like that. I'll save that for a future book, but
Well, I was curious if you did mention your siblings
yeah.
in the book.
And
Yeah,
a couple of my siblings have reached out. One of my brothers reached out and said, it kind of apologized. He said he felt like he didn't really know me, and he's number two in the family. And again, I'm number 10, so he's 17 years older than I am, and it took reading that book for him to realize, oh, I don't think I really know my brother. Isn't that interesting? So
That's
he said, thank you for that, and thank you for giving this, to me. I haven't heard from anybody else though. So
yeah.
no, that's not true. I've heard from one other sister, and who was also, I think, very moved by it and had a hard time, getting through some of it, but also thought it was fair.
Well, you're
But
10 of 10, so some of those kids, as you were growing up, they were probably not even in the house anymore, right? When they would
no,
not
it was
even,
a precious few years that we were all actually
yeah, you were,
living there.
yeah.
They were, they started going off to college when I was one, I think. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
When did
The oldest two were seniors in high school when I was born.
right.
So
When did
yeah,
where did you grow, where were you born and raised?
Chicago, outside of
Oh,
Chicago.
oh, no
Yeah.
wonder you said that about Pope Leo. Okay, I
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, you're in California now, right?
Seattle.
Oh, Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah. Right
I'm
time
from,
zone.
I'm from New York. Everything on the other side of the George Washington Bridge is California.
Mm,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so, and then you mentioned a second section because I know you did some self-analysis about your relationship with your parents.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of
Um,
that is in the first part. The second part it sort of looks at uh, my experience as a gay adult. I tell the story about Dan Savage. I call that chapter "Dan Savage Ruined My Life."
well, turned on some
Because he
light bulbs
did,
for you.
and I'm so glad he did. But
Hmm.
yeah, so that's a piece of the second part, and yeah, and some of the other essays look at how did my growing up, how did my education, how did my understanding of the world help me understand things like holidays and traditions, and how do we look at Thanksgiving, and hold on to what's good about Thanksgiving, but also move forward, leaving some of the bad stuff, behind. I think about that a lot in my essay Grateful. Um, yeah, so the second section is sort of, yeah, how did I start to navigate the world, and what were the challenges that I felt confident to mm, confront, I guess. Yeah.
Hmm. There seems to be a general, or more general, not general, but more general acceptance of homosexuality, at least in this country, or at least in certain states in this country. And you were a teacher of young children. What do you think the difference is for young children today who are gay versus when you were coming up?
Hmm. I gotta say, growing up today with the resources of the internet, with the visibility that queer people have achieved in mainstream media,
Hmm.
a lot of that is significantly different. So they have, I marveled when I was teaching high school at the access that my students had just, through their phones and through their computers to, just to YouTube and like what are the resources on YouTube? I couldn't find anything past, what was given to me growing up. So, you had to figure out where to go. Nobody was telling queer kids like how to grow up and what to do and where to meet other people and how to be safe and how to, so we were always looking, searching for it, and sometimes finding each other and sometimes not. Whereas now I think it's amazing what connectivity has given kids in terms of finding each other and finding resources and ways to feel safe and ways to feel protected and ways to find language to describe yourself and understand yourself.
I think
There's,
you're right. I think that is the
mm,
key, the promulgation of the internet and social media and all.
yeah. On the other hand, as a teacher, I was also horrified by the ways that parents used phones. I had a friend who called them leashes. That the phone was a way to track your children. Suddenly,
Mm,
like the kid thought it was all about independence, but now, you follow the kid on GPS, so you know exactly where they're going. So they have to call and text every time they get someplace. So they're disabled in a lot of ways in terms of making their own independent
yeah.
choices and independent decisions, and they're not given the chance to kind of figure things out on their own and
Yeah.
make a decision and then think it through and figure it out. So I worry about how generation has grown up without having to do that, without having to figure that out.
Right.
Um,
It.
and for queer kids, I think that's also like, yeah, you might become so dependent on your family that you're not going to reach out and find the place that's safe for you. And, if you haven't been given any independence to exercise, figure out where you should or where you could push a boundary or move on your own,
Right.
I think that's going to be tough for a lot of people.
I I understand what you're saying. I think the accessibility to, well, access to everything whenever you want it is a blessing on some level,
Mm,
but a curse on another.
yeah.
It gives you something and it takes something away. And
I
sometimes
think yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No, you say it.
Oh, I was just thinking one of the mistakes that I think my generation and older of queer folks has made is we didn't tell enough stories. We didn't tell enough stories about what life was, 50 years ago, 25 years ago. It's part of what motivated me to write this book and the whole Pride section is there were things that I wanted to preserve so that the next generation might be able to look and say, how did you deal with this? I think in the last 5 years, kids who have grown up in what they thought, queer kids who have grown up in what they thought was an increasingly inclusive and safe place to be, it's been a real whiplash in the last 5 to 10 years. I have friends and family who are queer and trans, and it was a great world to find the resource, especially for trans friends and students and family members. They were finding resources, they were finding protections, and now it's a war zone, and they are the targets. And it's I don't know. Could we have told more stories about how did we survive it the last time?
Hmm.
It's not a coincidence that I think you're hearing a lot of stories in queer circles about the 80s. A lot of people are talking about how in the 80s queer people were targeted as not just aberrant and religious, targets of religious ethics or morals, but AIDS provided a whole new, target on our backs, and it unleashed a whole different level of vitriol. Um, and I don't know that the rest of the world pays enough attention to that. So maybe we need to tell those stories more. So right now, I think we're telling those stories about the 80s a lot because we want to send the message. We got through this before.
Right.
Here's how we got through it. We have new challenges here. What are we gonna hold on to? And the voices that I've found most compelling are people like Leo Herrera and Dan Savage, who have been adamant that this is not the time to lose joy, that this is the time to lean into queer joy, embrace, create spaces for you to experience what is queer joy, because that is going to be the most impactful thing when it talks about resilience through the challenges that we're walking through now.
It's funny as you was talking, I don't remember the AIDS epidemic at the time, how pronounced it was back then, and probably still is on a certain level, but it's not really talked about at all
Hmm.
in the present tense.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
It's
it's taught in school as a from a historical perspective or not.
No, I'm guessing that the history classes are not under exploring why in the 80s funding was denied to AIDS research and care. I'm sure the story has not made it into textbooks about Reagan and his administration openly laughing about gay men dying of AIDS. So, yeah, those are stories that need to be preserved one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the worm turned when I don't want to missay who the basketball player was that got AIDS. That changed
Magic.
Magic Johnson. It was Magic Johnson. That
Hmm.
that changed a lot of that laughing.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, but it was
squelched a lot of it
too
anyway.
little, too late, and as a result, it was a another instance of an administration making bad moral choices with devastating global consequences.
Right.
So, and we're still
Uh,
suffering it.
Bill, is this the book cover on the right?
Yep.
What made you come up with that?
This is a photograph by my friend Joel Avery, who's an educator and artist and poet, and we taught together years ago and have stayed good friends. Um, when this book was coming together, and I was looking for, uh, some way to grace it, with some image. I immediately reached out to Joel and asked him, I sent him, a couple of excerpts of the book and sort of an outline. And I said, hey, does anything from your work, anything resonate, anything stand out? So he sent me a batch of photos that he thought might resonate. This was the first photo I opened, and I just kept coming back to it for,
Mm.
day after day. I'd look at other images, I'd think about other things, but I kept coming back to this one.
And you're,
As much of a mess as it is, I think it's really graceful. I think it's really beautiful. Joel said he was just walking down the street in New York and saw this chair in the middle of, this mess, and something really struck him about it. So he grabbed the image. It felt to me like this is sort of what my book feels like. I feel like I'm sitting in that chair, and here's this mess of my life that I'm making sense of behind me. But I'm not obsessed with it. I'm not staring into the mess. Like I'm looking forward. I'm looking out at the world. So I that really resonated with me. This idea of, all this behind me. I'm not letting it go, but it is. But I'm still looking forward, and
right.
it's informing me. It's shaping me. So
Well,
that's why I liked this.
it's an interesting cover for sure. It makes you want to look closer at it and analyze it for a while.
Yeah,
It's kind of like one of
yeah,
those really artistic album covers, you know. You got to stare at it for about a half hour to get the whole thing in, you know.
yeah,
But you
yeah,
liked it. You liked it because it conveyed a feeling about the book to you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I really felt like I was sitting in that chair, and that's sort of the feeling that I want. I hope that if people who are able to read it, um, I hope that that's what it feels like. That we're just kind of sitting face to face and having a conversation, and I'm telling stories, and it's not about my obsession of, yeah, I don't want you to know everything about my life, but it's more about we should tell our stories.
Sure.
I want to hear your stories. I want to hear I hope that somebody who's reading this might not just look at it like, oh, well, that was his life. I hope somebody finishes these essays and thinks, oh, well, what comes up for me? Like, what is it about my life that I
Yeah.
want to come back to? What do I want to hold on to? What do I need to let go of? And what do I want to pay attention to?
I'm going to click on the Amazon page, but I said before we started recording, well, maybe we were recording, that you give other links besides Amazon and Barnes and Noble on there. And I should make it a habit because lately I have been interviewing a lot of people who've written books. I should make it a habit to say you can go to your local independent bookstore, and if they don't have Bill's book, ask them for it, and they will be more than happy to order it for you, and you'll get it
Hmm.
with very quickly. You'll get it
Hmm.
within a few days.
And Tom, if
And
you click on through your local bookstore on the website,
mhm.
that takes you to bookshop.org, which will also connect you to local independent bookstores.
Well, that's a great asset, and I'm very glad you did that, Bill.
Yeah, I was on a podcast a couple months ago, and the host pointed this website out to me, and I thought, oh, this is amazing! Like,
Oh,
this is such an easy way to support your local bookstores. So,
yeah, I
I'm
have
actually
one
wearing a
here.
shirt from one of my local bookstores, Charlie's Queer Books in
Oh, very
Fremont, in
good.
Seattle.
I
And
have an independent
yeah.
bookstore in my town too, and I always try and direct people there, you know, because you know, you got to keep those independent booksellers
Yeah.
up there, you know. But I just want to quickly just go on Amazon. Can you see this, by the way?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to quickly go on the Amazon page because the reviews on this have been great. Um, uh, it's only a couple of months out, right? Maybe 6 months or so you put it
Yeah.
out. And how has the reception been?
I have been really moved by the reviews that I've read and the responses that I've gotten. So it's what the biggest surprise is how particular stories are resonating with people. or particular themes. I think I've gotten some people reflecting on the way that I talk about religion and my sexual identity, and I don't see them in conflict. And so I think that has been really striking. I think we're used to talking about them as oppositional. They've never been in a conflict for me.
Right.
So I think that has so I've gotten some feedback that that's kind of a different thing. Um, I explore grief from a lot of different dimensions, and I think that has really resonated with people. But I'm also not, I hope just in this conversation you get the sense I'm not always super serious and, all the time. But a lot of the writing is light, and I like to tell the funny stories because it's a balance of, the light and the happy memories balanced with the dark stuff and
Yeah,
balanced with the hard stuff. And
I do want to
so,
say, as I mentioned to you before, I did read some excerpts. Uh, Maybe I should tell you what site that is because there was a lot of excerpts from the book,
hmm.
and I laughed a lot. I laughed a lot at your grandfather's quotes and your mom's quotes, and so people will find this very entertaining
Yeah.
and analytical at the same time, which is a nice combo, you know.
Story of my life.
Yeah, well, that's a good gift to have. And I really wanted to come here to show you that some of these reviews have been pretty good. This is
I'd
one of
love
the best.
more.
This is one of the
If
best
anybody's
reviews.
writing reviews, that would
This
be
is one of
great.
the best reviews I've ever seen. The greatest book I've ever read. Wow. That should put it in a nutshell. But anyway, so I have to ask the inevitable. I'm taking a lot of your time, but I have to ask the inevitable question. Do you have a book in the works?
I do actually. I'm working on a book about weddings. So my work outside of writing, I'm a ritual designer. Way back when I went to divinity school, and my focus was I was focused on the comparative study of religion, and I was always really interested in ritual and how we use ritual to shape relationships and create culture. And so ritual was always my kind of obsession. And I started doing weddings for friends. I was working as a campus minister and I was teaching, but once in a while, friends, needed an officiant or they wanted to do something interfaith or intercultural and they didn't know how to do that. So I would help with that. When I burned out and I decided to shift careers, I decided to go back to my first love of ritual. And so I started this little ritual design business, and most of my work is in weddings. But my approach is to design a ceremony, not necessarily repeating traditions, but I think a wedding ceremony is a really ripe opportunity to communicate what's important to you, and you've got people who love you and surrounding you and paying very close attention to how you're doing this moment, how you're making this transition in life. So I'm working on a book that's a guide to designing a wedding, not necessarily as an event planning guide, but starting with your vows, starting with reflection, and then growing out from there, building a ceremony and celebrations, from that as the starting point.
And
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
and
The
that
working title is Choosing.
choosing.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's an interesting occupation. You've developed that over years? I'm assuming, right?
Hmm.
The ritual.
Yeah, I
Uh,
started the practice in 2020, actually. When I had taken a year off after I left schools to heal and figure out what to do next, and then summer 2020, I established Bill Hulseman Rituals.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
those rituals, are they governed? Or are they not governed, but are they? Um, does Catholicism have anything? Does it show up in there at all? That's a better way to ask.
In my rituals,
Yeah.
I mean, I learned a lot from Catholic liturgy. That was my first instruction in religion and ritual was, I was an altar boy. I was an altar server and I loved it. I loved being part of it and seeing all the parts that were working to make a mass happen. Just one little liturgy has all these moving parts. I always thought that was really interesting as a kid. Um, and I worked as a campus minister for a long time on Catholic liturgies, and so that's very comfortable territory for me. But yeah, and I do work with a fair number of people who grew up Catholic or are doing an interfaith ceremony, and they want to figure out how to be thoughtful about that, and so I can tap into that.
Interesting.
But I don't do any, yeah, I'm not doing any traditional in the sense of within a cultural or religious tradition ceremonies. I'm for people who don't have a tradition to draw on for whatever reason, or they want to do something interfaith or intercultural, or they just want to do something non-patriarchal,
Hmm.
and take that approach to designing a wedding, designing a ceremony.
That's great. That's great.
Thanks.
I'm sure you're in demand.
Uh, I'm happy with it. Yeah.
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 Well, I
I
do
burned out on
appreciate.
my last career, so I'm not out to overload myself.
No, don't
That was a lesson I learned. That,
take it at a
pacing
take
is
take it
important.
at a slow clip this time.
Yeah,
Sure.
but I love some have been very traditional, kind of feels familiar flows, and then some really experimental ceremonies, and it's been really fun. I've loved the clients that I've been able to work with.
Well, that's great, and
Yeah,
I certainly appreciate you coming on tonight, Bill. And I'm looking forward to reading the book. Um, I am also looking forward to your next book about this career you have now.
thank you, thank
Yeah,
you.
because you are a good writer. I can tell from the excerpts.
Ah,
Maybe
thank
if
you.
you stay on the line after we're done recording, I'll show you where I found those excerpts.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll get your email address too. But anyway, thank you so much for being on the line. Hold on one second. As you know, I am technologically challenged most of the time.
You're doing
So
great. You're doing
thank you
great.
so much and have a great night, sir. I appreciate you coming on tonight, Bill.
Thanks again for the invitation.
Absolutely.